So I will be discussing about some of the issues and challenges in the earthquake risk reduction in Pakistan, as also was uh, mentioned by Tahir Saab in the introduction. This is the Pakistan Society of Civil Engineering Technical Lecture 32, and my focus mainly would be identifying some of the issues which we are currently facing in this area, and then how we can convert or what kind of efforts which are required to convert those issues into challenges. So I may not be able to completely answer this question that how safe are our buildings against earthquakes, because there is a long way to go in achieving the seismic resilience in Pakistan. But still I will try to highlight some of the issues, and they may be set as the future direction or future recommendation for directing the flow and you can say direction of research and some of the other efforts which are being made at the government level and at the policy level also. So let me start my story with one piece of news which have just surfaced recently on 29th June from the field of archaeology. And the news was that a 4,000-year-old skeleton of a female was found having a child in her arms in China, and they were believed to have died from a massive earthquake which struck China at that time, which also triggered massive floods. This is not the very first news. There were other archaeological discoveries also which indicated the destruction caused by several historical, natural, or man-made disasters. These kind of news are just to ask this question that since with all of our technological advancements and all our latest tools which we have in the field of disaster risk reduction, have how much we have succeeded in actually transferring them into the grassroots level so that the local people or the occupants at the household level, they may be aware of those efforts and willing to take some precautionary measures. So we might be thinking that with all the latest advancements and these technologies which we have, we might have made significant advancement or in significant improvement in the seismic risk reduction or risk reduction against any natural disaster. And such sad stories may not happen now, but unfortunately we may be wrong if we may be thinking like this, because uh, relatively recently we have the Kashmir 2005 earthquake. And why I'm saying recently, because the phenomena of an earthquake is actually spanning over hundreds and thousands of years. So the Kashmir 2000 earthquake have basically resulted in a significant not only structural damage but also social loss as well as economic loss. We have a devastated, uh, you can say, several communities and several cities, in fact, which were lying close to the epicenter at that time. And just to give you an example and just to relate it to what we can historically see from archaeology and how much progress we have made, is that you may also read some of the records which were available at that time and from the local newspapers, and several of us also have a cultural memory, some young people, although we may have people who may have experienced more than one earthquake in their lifetime, but still we have an overall cultural memory of those earthquakes. Although the phenomena itself have spanned over hundreds and thousands of years, but almost all of us have experienced this devastating earthquake at that time. And we know that several of the school buildings, government buildings, uh, and some other public buildings, they were collapsed completely. And this specific text, which I have just taken from one record of a journalist, local journalist, relatively recently published on some death anniversary of the Kashmir 2005 earthquake, he was calling that he have seen actually the big pieces of concrete on ground, the ground which was once some school or college. Actually, he is calling them big pieces of concrete, but we know that they were reinforced concrete slabs which just collapsed because the unreinforced masonry supporting those slabs were collapsed. So there are several issues which may be addressed right at structure level, but also at the awareness and capacity building level also, which I will be discussing. So the point is that those kind of sad stories keep on coming from all parts of the world still with all of our developments and all the latest tools. So as a whole, we may not be that successful in transferring or converting some of the research outputs and technological advancements into actions. Actions at the right level, actions at the grassroots level. We may not be that successful in that. Uh, so considering this background of this overall, you can say, scheme, uh, let me show you some of the basic things which we can discuss later, and also I'll address them one by one also. This picture is taken from the mainstream media, and this is a typical picture of the Kashmir earthquake, damage caused by the Kashmir 2005 earthquake. And these are those pieces of concrete which the local journalists were mentioning, and they are basically reinforced concrete slabs supported on unreinforced masonry. So they just collapsed, they just went down, and many occupants, kids, and all those people, they buried under them, and then we were having significant social loss just because of this unfortunate kind of building stock we had at that time. The current situation I will be discussing later, but this is what we had at that time. Most of the buildings, they were unreinforced masonry, and they were supported. Basically, they were you can say the heavy roof on top of them were the basic reason, and the out of plane collapse of masonry infill wall was the basic reason, identified by several reports and several research outputs after that. Uh, so let's start this whole story with a bigger picture. I think we are all familiar with this global seismic hazard map, originally developed by G-Shape, although it is an old version, but still I just wanted to keep it here because it tells us that we unfortunately are one of the countries which are lying on uh, the the boundary of two interacting plates. In fact, three in case of Pakistan: Eurasian, Indian, and Arabian plate. So we are those, you can say, lying on those areas which are shown here by the red color means they have a high hazard for future earthquake. So you can compare some of the numbers also by having these kind of visuals, but I just wanted to tell or give an overview of what we have, the level of hazard what we have. So there are very few countries which have a high seismic hazard more than us. Very few countries. So we are in one of the most seismically vulnerable areas. Similarly, another story which presents the seismic hazard map for the whole Southeast Asia, and we can see here the numbers in terms of peak ground acceleration are also visible. So we are uh, in in areas which are highly susceptible to future earthquakes. So these kind of hazard studies globally, they give us an indication that where we actually stand if we talk about the level of and the probability of future earthquake in Pakistan. Now let's relate that high hazard, because I will be discussing the hazard related issues later also, but I just want to quickly relate that with the existing building stock in Pakistan. According to a relatively recent study in 2010 basically, but the current number may not be varying that much. 93% of the existing building stock in Pakistan is unreinforced masonry. They are non-engineered. 93%. It is a huge number. You can see here that compared to some of the other countries, we have the highest percentage of unreinforced masonry in Pakistan, and we have the traditional burnt brick masonry, which is very weak in the out of plane direction, and we still keep on using it. Most of our building stock is made from these kind of weak structural system in out of plane direction. So this is something which we should focus directly. All the efforts, all the research outputs, all the policy making, they should directly focus on unreinforced masonry. So this is the very first starting point. Whatever you are doing in the field of reinforced concrete, in the area of some other like steel structures, for example, they may be addressing just to 7-8% of the total building stock. So we have to come up with a national policy or national action plan to improve the seismic safety of this 93% unreinforced masonry. We know already that this conventional masonry system which we use in Pakistan and some of the other developing countries also use the same system. Burnt bricks laid with loose or weak mortar joint, and then the out of plane stiffness is almost zero. Out of plane strength also is almost zero. We know that this conventional system have several issues. It is the first type of structure which collapses as a result of an earthquake. It is very weak in out of plane direction. It is unable to dissipate seismic energy, and if it is not confined properly, it may have an out of plane collapse also if it is not anchored properly. And it also offers some advantages, but it also has significant disadvantages also. So we know that it is low cost. So this is the reason why it is we still keep on using it, even by knowing that some of the issues related to that. They may provide some better insulation compared to some of the other systems available in low cost, but uh, still we may develop some improved masonry systems, and I will discuss one of them, one potential candidate for this. And it may also perform well under gravity loading, but this is not our concern right now. We will be focusing mainly on the lateral loading, and therefore in lateral loading this kind of a system is very weak. The burnt bricks are, we know already that they are very heavy, and therefore they may cause significant social loss also, apart from the economic loss. So if we look at the historical pattern of earthquake, the damage which they have caused, we have to rephrase our question. On the left, we have the Balakot city after 2005 Kashmir earthquake, and I keep on using these pictures because in all of the presentations and seminars, because they give a very clear indication of what actually the condition is. On the left, we have Balakot after 2005 Kashmir earthquake, and we can see that the whole city is completely leveled. We can see all those big pieces of concrete, uh, as the local journalist experienced at that time, but or explained at that time. But basically, they are reinforced concrete slabs which just collapsed because of the collapse of supporting masonry. On the right, we have a close-up picture of one of the collapsed houses. The person in the yellow or orange is basically this house is his own house, and this picture was taken 1 month after the Kashmir 2005 earthquake. And the message I want to give you here is that just imagine that the earthquake once occur, it becomes the permanent part of the lives of those people. So he is just sitting on top of the rubble of his own house, and he is forced to actually carry out his day-to-day routine or resume his life after the earthquake. So we may need to rephrase this question when we ask that how prepared enough, how we are to handle the next big earthquake. We actually have to rephrase it to how safe are our buildings against earthquakes. So if we have more safe infrastructural facilities, we may uh, we may develop in the preparedness and the loss mitigation also. So just to give you a recent example, uh, and I want to make a point that even a relatively low magnitude earthquake may cause significant damage in our local scenario, considering the quality of construction and some of the other issues in our construction industries. So in this table on the top left, you can see some of the relatively recent earthquakes. In fact, the Kashmir 2005 is also included, but after that we have 2008 Ziyarat earthquake. Then in 2013 we have two earthquakes, both greater than magnitude 7 in Balochistan. Then in 2015 and also the 2019 New Mirpur earthquake. The first one in the list is magnitude 5.6, and according to some magnitude scale, it was even magnitude 5.2. Although it didn't result in casualties as much as some of the other earthquakes, but we have seen almost all types of damages in this relatively low magnitude earthquake. 5.6 is considered from low to medium, but we have actually seen the cracking in infill walls. We have seen complete collapse in some cases. We have seen slope failures. So almost all kind of damages we have seen in this magnitude 5.6. So it shows that even a low magnitude earthquake, when occur at relatively shallow depths, may cause significant damage. So all of these indications are clear. Our building stock is not able to actually resist severe ground shaking, or in some cases even moderate ground shakings. So from now onwards, if we talk about the earthquake resilience in Pakistan, I will be discussing on just four areas, and I will try to cover some of the aspects, some of the issues in these four areas. The first area, which is my own area, and it is the research and academics. Second is about the enforcement mechanism of different building codes, and in fact the development of building codes. The third is the capacity building of the current structural engineers and designers in order to equip them for the latest technological advancements which are occurring around the globe. And last is very important, and that is about the public education and awareness. The role of digital media in actually disseminating some of the information which is required right at the grassroots level. So let me start with the first uh, aspect or first area where we may need efforts in achieving seismic resilience or earthquake resilience, and that is in research and academics. And I can identify two main issues, two categories of main issues. One is the accurate characterization of seismic hazard. First, we may need to know how much hazard we have in our this region, and that will result in a realistic seismic loading which we can apply and design our structures to. And then the second area is about the earthquake resistant design of buildings and some of the advancements which the world have already made and we still have to make yet. So some of the challenges in the first research and academics and related to the seismic hazard assessment. Uh, we know already that if we can divide the earthquake problem into two broad categories, and those would be the structure side and the loading side. In the on the first structure side, what we know is that we already have to construct a linear or nonlinear analysis model, which is a reasonable compromise between a real structure and its mathematical representation. On the loading side, we have to come up with some characterization of seismic loading, seismic ground motions. Either they can be in the form of the time history, acceleration time history, or in the form of some design spectrum. And since currently it is not possible to actually predict a future earthquake, so therefore we have a probabilistic science behind that, which actually give us an indication or some, you can say, uh, approximate characterization of the future ground shaking. It itself contain a detailed process of seismic hazard assessment, and then the site response analysis in order to quantify the amplification effect of different local soils. So considering this overall story in mind, I can also identify the issues in these four areas. Accurate characterization of seismic hazard, and then we have the site soil characteristics. Similarly, we can have issues in the structural modeling in the local context, and then lastly, the seismic analysis and earthquake resistant design of the existing buildings and evaluation of existing buildings and design of new buildings. So in the first area, the accurate characterization of seismic hazard, the very first issue which comes in my mind is a reliable, complete, and a comprehensive earthquake catalog for Pakistan. And several attempts have been made, and one comprehensive attempt is still being made. Just to give you an idea about those attempts, one example is shown here. This is the historical seismicity catalog for Pakistan, which we have just recently developed here at NUST. And this map is showing the shallow earthquakes having a crustal depth of less than 50 kilometer. And we can see that most of the shallow earthquakes, they are spread along the main plate boundary, dividing the country into two halves. And some of the shallow earthquakes, they are also concentrated in the northern Hindu Kush region. If we talk about the deep earthquakes, they are mostly concentrated in the Hindu Kush region. And we have often seen or heard news from uh, media about the large magnitude earthquakes greater than 7 or 6.5. They may affect the seismic hazard within the administrative boundary of Pakistan. So you can see some of these stars here, star symbols on the northern side in the Hindu Kush region, and they are all earthquakes with magnitude greater than 7. Even some earthquakes, very deep earthquakes having magnitude greater than 8 were also experienced in last 100 years. So the very first issue is to come up with a complete and reliable earthquake catalog which can be used as a basis for future seismic hazard assessments. Hazard assessment is an approximate science, and therefore we need uh, to update it after every few years as the more data is available, as the new methodologies and analysis procedures are available. So therefore we must have a very, you can say, reliable seismic source characterization model for Pakistan. So a unified attempt is being made, and this study is also part of that attempt. The second issue which I can highlight here is the crustal fault database or the crustal fault seismic source model for Pakistan. Currently, we don't have a unified study or a unified database for all the crustal faults of Pakistan. Many of the crustal faults, they are unnamed. Some of them are uh, the data is available in terms of slip rates and some of the basic geometry of those faults, but most of them, their slip rates are not available, and there may be several of them which are not even identified or discovered yet. So this is one example where the global earthquake model database is shown with 110 faults which are available in that database, but this database still uh, miss some of the major faults in the northeast of Pakistan. So just to give you an idea that how much we know and how much we don't know, this picture is showing the all those faults which are in blue color. They are available in the global earthquake model database. So we may have some of their data from the international database, which is the result of several of the uh, attempts and several of the you can say research outputs by some of the researchers in Pakistan. But all those faults which are shown here with the yellow color, uh, they are not included in the global earthquake model database. So we have to work on compiling a complete and reliable fault source model for Pakistan. And currently we are, you can say, working with the Geological Survey of Pakistan and Pakistan Meteorological Department to come up with a more accurate and reliable fault source characterization model that will be used as a basis for a better seismic hazard assessment in future. Another issue which I can identify in the seismic hazard of Pakistan and some of the attempts which were made in this area is the development of risk targeted ground motions. From 2009 onwards, the International Building Code and American Society of Civil Engineers 7-16 document, they moved on to a new definition to a definition of the seismic hazard, and that is that once you have the MCE level ground motions, you have to modify them for based on the risk coefficient at each pixel, and you have to modify the whole, you can say, study area, and finally come up with a map based on a target risk. So the new definition of seismic hazard was not only a ground motion with 2, 4, 7, 5 years return period, it also had some additional points in that, and those were that those values should be modified based on 1% probability of collapse in 50 years. All those buildings which are designed on that hazard level should have a 1% probability of collapse in next 50 years of exposure. This was the new risk targeted MCE level ground motions. And since 2009 onward, the USGS have started making those maps which are risk targeted. And another difference is that instead of having uh, uh, geometric mean response spectrum, the new definition shifted to the maximum direction spectral response acceleration. And on top of that, we also have some deterministic seismic hazard caps, and finally come up with the MCER ground motion. So this is something which is not done yet for Pakistan. The latest seismic hazard assessment which we are currently performing for the new building code of Pakistan will also be not incorporating the risk targeting, because the risk targeting may require the fragility analysis data for each of the pixel in Pakistan, and currently that data is not available. So this is something which we should consider in future, and this is something which should be our next target, to develop risk targeted ground motion data set for Pakistan. Just to give you an example of some of the hazard assessments which are already carried out and which are still being carried out, this is the one which we have recently carried out at NUST, and it is showing the peak ground acceleration values for 2475 years return period. So this is not the design level. This is the 2% probability of exceedance in 50 years. So you can identify clearly that the hazard is completely matching with the seismotectonic environment of the country, because in this study the crustal faults, whatever data was available from the global earthquake model, the crustal faults were also included in that hazard calculations. But as I have mentioned earlier, that even the global earthquake model database still misses some of the important faults which should be considered, mostly on the northeast side. So therefore, there is still a room for improvement, and we will keep on improving our seismic source database, and finally keep on improving the hazard calculations. This is the spectral acceleration maps for different return periods. This is on the left hand side, we have the short period spectral acceleration, also known as SS, for the DBE level, design basis earthquake. On the right hand side, we have the MCE level. And the numbers correspond to the hazard which is higher than what we had in 2007 building code of Pakistan. But the effort is still going on, and we are currently improving that source model to have a very clear picture of the seismic hazard. Another related area which I want to highlight here is the seismic monitoring network, the situation or current status in Pakistan. I give you an example. I just compare Pakistan with one another country, or the reason why I have taken Taiwan here is that it is a very small country with an area of 36,000 kilometers square. Just compare it with Pakistan, 881,000. So just compare the population also. The whole population of Taiwan may be less than one megacity like Karachi in Pakistan. And the reason why I have compared both of these countries is that their design hazard level in terms of peak ground acceleration is very close. The maximum hazard, as indicated by the national seismic hazard maps for Pakistan, the current one, uh, unless we just replace it in this year, but if we talk about 2007 one, it is 0.32 G, the maximum PGA which we may have in Pakistan, which is classified following the UBC methodology as zone 4. In Taiwan, we have 0.35 G. But all these dots on both of these maps, the triangular dots, they are showing the seismic stations. On the left, we have the seismic station network by the Pakistan Meteorological Department. And on the right hand side, we have in the same thing in Taiwan. So you can clearly see how much you just compare the scale. You can't even count those red dots. Each of them is a seismic monitoring station. But on the left, we can count, although having a great area and a big population, huge population, but still we may have maybe 20 to 30 maximum. And still their data is not open source, and some of there may be some issues also with the data, because we have carried out hazard assessment and we really had some of the challenges or issues in the form of getting that data, real-time history data for accelerations. So this comparison shows where we actually lie and where we need to progress. The development of an integrated, comprehensive seismic monitoring network is the need of the hour for Pakistan. Similarly, another area in the same overall theme is the liquefaction potential of some of the sites in Pakistan. And if not liquefaction potential, then maybe the amplification offered by some of the sites due to local soil conditions. So in this particular example, I show you some of the areas, especially in the Sindh region, the coastal belt. There may be several sites which are susceptible to liquefaction. And also some of the recent studies have shown that even the soil classes which are considered good, like soil class D, it may offer an amplification of more than 2 times when you compare the bedrock level hazard with the surface level hazard. So several site response analysis results are indicating that we may have a high level of amplification for some of the local soils. Now let's move on to the second side or other side of the whole story, and that is the structure side. I'll be discussing some of the issues in the structural modeling and seismic analysis of structures in Pakistan. We know that the evolution of seismic design approaches, the evolution started when we actually shifted from intuitive design to code-based design. And then there was a whole era of different code-based procedures and all those prescriptive design provisions. But then in the late 90s, we know that the performance-based design emerged, and now it is fully developed into a state-of-the-art new seismic design philosophy. Currently, it is being widely adopted in some of the developed countries, but the world have moved on also and also developed several other new seismic design philosophies, including consequence and risk-based design, and then finally resilience-based design. Because in these two approaches, in the latest these two approaches, you actually do not uh, consider structure uh, as just one unit. You have to just consider it as a part of a complete kind of ecosystem of buildings and their environmental implications, and the building should be actually contributed to the overall the energy content and environment and carbon footprint also. So all of these latest concepts are now being integrated in the structural design. Our status currently is that we are our most of the engineering practice is still revolving around code-based design, and that too is mostly around UBC 97. But the world have moved on to latest seismic design philosophies, and for important structures and buildings, the performance-based design is a default approach for some of the innovative shapes and innovative structural systems. Currently, we are also lacking in this area on the structure side. So just to give you an example of what you can get if you can develop that technology or bring that technology in Pakistan. In this example, when you are actually performing the nonlinear analysis or inelastic analysis of your building structures, you can answer some of the questions explicitly asked by your clients. For example, how safe is my building? How much damage I can expect in this much level of future earthquake? All these questions can be explicitly answered now. Unfortunately, our current design practice is such that we still want to hide behind traditional building codes and do not want to explicitly answer these questions asked by the clients or other stakeholders. All we can say currently is that we have followed such and such code. But the latest performance-based design philosophies and other approaches sets you free to actually answer these questions, actually evaluate the performance of the building as they are built, as the design is there. So, for example, here you are seeing a 44-story example building which we have done, and actually the nonlinear dynamic analysis of that building helped us in identifying the actual level of damage at a particular hazard level. So we can even identify those columns or beams or shear wall elements which will have a certain cracking or yielding or any other damage. So the model itself can be shown to a client and that will be able to understand the level of damage. This is what you can get if you can adopt these new technologies. On the right hand side, you can see, for example, the progression of structural damage as the building is being forced in the lateral direction or pushed in the lateral direction. And also the cyclic, if you push it and pull it, you can keep on going until the building can be have significant damage, and therefore you can understand the progression of damage. The point I want to hear is that on the x-axis you have the roof drift of this particular building, and on the y-axis you have the normalized base shear normalized by the weight of the building. If you understand the progression of structural damage as the building is slowly being pushed in the lateral direction, you will see that the brick walls are the very first elements to actually crack. The masonry walls, burnt brick walls, used in this particular example building were the first one to actually crack. And their failure is brittle, which means cracking is their complete failure. Once they crack, they are gone. So this is very tricky because infill walls actually contribute to the stiffness of reinforced concrete frames when they are elastic. But just at the start of a severe earthquake, they are the very first one to leave that frame alone. So their stiffness contribution is gone already when you have a significant earthquake. So they participate in the elastic response of the building, but they do not participate in the inelastic response. So this is one issue which we may actually address. The way we built masonry infill walls is very wrong. Actually, we construct them such that they actually start participating like a structural element, and they are the first one to crack, and they are weak out of plane stiffness. So they may fall over occupants in case of a real severe ground shaking. And then the real structural damage start afterwards, for example, the shear wall cracking or column yielding, for example, in steel. So this masonry have several issues, and those are identified in these. You will be able to identify all those issues if you just embrace the fruits of these latest technological advancements. Then one issue is that I don't know, for some reason we are reluctant to perform dynamic analysis of our buildings. By dynamic analysis, I don't mean response spectrum analysis. I mean the real-time history analysis. Maybe the reason is that the time history analysis require the selection of the representative ground motions, and those require actually to understand the seismicity of your area, and therefore you will be able to actually select some representative or suitable ground motions. So this issue we have also tried to address in, and I will show you some of the efforts made at NUST. But this is very important. Currently, there have been a global effort or movement, you can say, to actually convert the current default design practice to the linear time history analysis instead of the equivalent static procedure or response spectrum analysis procedure, because you may have significant cost implications also. You may bring economy also if you perform dynamic analysis for the purpose of structural design, because when the building is actually shaken, the forces will be allowed to interact, different elements will be allowed to interact in dynamic manner, and therefore the estimate of design forces you will get at the end will be more realistic, and in some cases it will be less than what is predicted by the traditional seismic analysis procedures. We know that the modal combination rule in the response spectrum analysis is very conservative, so that may be addressed if you actually perform the real dynamic analysis. So in this figure, I just show you some of uh, the modal analysis results in for some example buildings which we have did. This also is one area which need to be addressed and which need to be, you can say, we need to mainstream the understanding of modal analysis and modal properties. Currently, most of our practicing engineers, they do not focus or they do not consider modal properties of the building right at the start of the design process. I keep on telling different designers and my students also that if your first mode is torsional, do not go ahead. Please try to fix that before you actually start calculating reinforcement and actually finalizing the geometry. If your first mode is torsional, your building is by its habit not performing in the desirable manner. It is weak in torsion. So a mode shape is the weakest configuration which you should always focus on. If it is undesirable, you should keep on modifying the geometry or keep on having some design decisions until you get them in the desirable range. So these modal properties, the natural time periods and mode shapes of a building, they are actually, you can say, the vitals of a building. If they are not correct, you should not go to some other level of calculations or implications. So these were few regular kind of buildings with setback effects also, but uh, we have also tried some buildings with irregular shapes and irregular geometries, both in plan as well as in the vertical direction. So these are some of the example buildings which we have did recently, and you can see that they have significant features of vertical and horizontal irregularities. And this is also one area which we should focus on, that uh, for the analysis and for the purpose of structural evaluation, example evaluation, or for testing some idea, we should take the real buildings either as they have designed or as they have built, so that the numbers are actually physically meaningful. They should be related to some real building, some real, you can say, structure. So we have taken buildings with real geometries, plan and vertical irregularities, and some of them have inclined beams, some of them have irregular shapes of columns and etc. This study I want to highlight specifically is to just show you one issue which we may consider, and that is the multiple application or repeated earthquakes, which means that a building in its design life may experience more than one earthquake, and it may damage or get into some nonlinear range, inelastic range, as a result of one earthquake, and then it may not perform well under the second earthquake as desired by the designer because of the initial damage which is accumulated as a result of first earthquake. So, and specifically in the areas like northern areas of Pakistan, where we may have large magnitude earthquakes from Hindu Kush region, there may also be some aftershocks. There may be some foreshocks also. So, buildings may experience more than one earthquake in their design life. So, in order to investigate whether this effect should be considered at the design level or not, we have taken some example buildings and converted their real design into the nonlinear model. So we have actually used their actual amount of reinforcement provided by the designer and the actual geometry and cross-section sizes, everything, and converted them into the nonlinear computer models and subject those nonlinear models to a sequence of foreshocks, main shock, and aftershock. And then we try to compare the results with the main shock only, which is considered for the purpose of structural design at that time. So we considered several levels of foreshocks, aftershocks as indicated by the spectrum on the bottom right. And also we developed different sequences of ground motion. What we actually observed or what we have noted here is that when the whole sequence of a foreshock, main shock and aftershock is applied, we expect a more energy dissipation or the level of non-linearity in the computer model compared to if we only apply the main shock. So the actual energy dissipated by the structure in case of the sequence was more than what was dissipated only in the main shock. And actually we can convert those dissipated energy, or we understand that dissipated energy in the form of the nonlinearity, or the level of nonlinearity experienced by different structural elements in your in that particular structure. So we were able to actually observe that the number of elements which were experiencing inelasticity, or which were basically going into nonlinear range, which were yielding or cracking, they were more in case of the sequence of foreshock, main shock and aftershock, compared to if we have only the main shock. So we were able to identify those problematic beams or columns which were actually being damaged as a result of the whole sequence, and they were still safe if we have only applied the main shock. So we actually have seen that in varying degrees, the level of damage experienced in case of sequence was more. So we were actually, since we have constructed nonlinear models for such purpose, so therefore we were able to actually identify those beams and columns which were safe against main shock, but were not safe against the whole sequence. So these kind of you can say systematic studies to directly address the issues related to field practice or related to the construction industry is required. The conclusions which should be directly implementable or directly of practical use. So we finally concluded for this case that if we have a moderate main shock, foreshock with a high main shock and a moderate foreshock, we may need to retrofit some of the additional elements for this existing buildings. Similarly, another area which we are rigorously working on nowadays is the performance-based seismic design. Recently, this is a building which we have done recently, and it is located in Karachi. It is 48-story building, and you can see here that we were able to identify the level of structural damage in all columns and shear walls and beams, uh, and we were able to actually see the progression of damage clearly as the building is being stressed from zero to a certain level of later loading. So these are some of the examples which you may actually you can see and try to understand that the implications of all of this information which is being generated as a result of all these latest tools or application of these technologies, uh, it will be tremendous, especially in case of Pakistan, a country like Pakistan, where the current building practice is still mostly following the traditional code-based practice. This is another example of the building where we have actually identified the damage of all the shear walls, all the columns under different types of ground motions. So we were clearly uh, able to understand which kind of ground motion was more damaging to this particular example. So for different ground motion sets, the structural damage expected was different. All those shear wall elements which are shown here by the red color means that they are already cracked. This picture can even be shown to a stakeholder or a client which may not be a structural engineer, for example, but still he will be able to get the answers which he requires from us. Another area which I want to highlight here is on the structure side is the seismic resilience of buildings having historical or cultural importance. As also was mentioned by Tahir Saab in my introduction, that I was involved in the structural and material assessment of the Baltit Fort, which is located in Gilgit-Baltistan in Hunza. And what we did as part of that investigation is that we have actually try to understand the seismic performance of cribbage system, which is a very common structural system in that part of Pakistan. So we actually carried out some field testing also, but then we came back with all the information, with all those materials, and we have actually constructed those uh, wallets of those cribbage system and subjected them to the lateral cyclic loading in order to understand the level of energy dissipation offered by this system. Our conclusion was that this system can significantly, if it is confined properly, it can significantly influence uh, the overall energy dissipation of the structure itself. But one issue which we have found in this particular structural system was the local failure. If under severe shaking, a certain local failure occur, for example, as shown by the figure on the right hand side, they may have a brittle failure. So the special emphasis uh, should be given to the confinement of stone masonry in the wooden scheme which is proposed as part of the improved structural system in this investigation. Then another issue which we kind of urgently need is the structural modeling of unreinforced masonry buildings. As I have indicated in the start that more than 90% of the existing building stock in Pakistan is non-engineered. Now we cannot just ignore them. They are there. People are living in them. And therefore we need to do something about assessing the seismic performance of such systems. And obviously the very first step would be on the structure side would be to actually model them, subject them to ground shaking and later loading and see how they perform. So this is some area which I mean, no one is actually really working on the modeling of unreinforced masonry buildings. And that is, for example, in order to first understand the different failure mechanism offered by our local masonry, and then try to simulate them in different uh, software packages based on finite element analysis, and they should also be, the idea is that they should be the mainstream programs. We know that we can perform micro modeling of these kind of walls or buildings with unreinforced masonry, but the common design practice may not be able to follow those specialized modeling techniques which are being used in the academia. So what we need is that uh, all those research findings should be converted into some simple guidelines, simple modeling guidelines which a common designer can use in the mainstream commercial programs in order to include the effect of, for example, masonry infill, or in order to model unreinforced masonry. One possible solution which I can think of this issue is the equivalent frame modeling of unreinforced masonry, and that is already proposed as being used all over the world. But here we can introduce it and then we can develop simplified guidelines for our structural designers so that they can also model it and analyze it. The idea is that once you have a real masonry geometry with some openings and everything, you convert them into an equivalent frame. And the conversion mechanism is already being proposed as part of this equivalent frame method. Uh, all around the world, people use that approach. And the properties of that equivalent frame can be tuned to the local masonry used in Pakistan, and therefore that equivalent frame is expected to behave or to actually perform just like the real masonry would have performed in earthquake. So we can construct nonlinear uh, equivalent frames representing unreinforced masonry walls. So in this slide, just an example two-story frame is shown. Actually, it is done by one of my students where he actually tried to map the properties of local masonry with the equivalent frame properties. And he was able to successfully develop or map basically the lateral behavior of equivalent frame with that of the observed experimental behavior of masonry. So this is one potential solution which we are currently developing, and we will be able to just we will want it to give it uh, to the construction industry and the current practicing engineers. One issue which we are currently facing about the modeling of unreinforced masonry or any masonry structure is the complex modeling requirements as offered by the irregular shapes or geometries used in the existing buildings in Pakistan. For example, these are few examples from Rawalakot in AJK region, where we have the irregular plans, or we have the extensive use of hollow decorative columns. Directly the slab is resting on those columns, and therefore the rest of the building is, for example, resting on some other structural system, for example the load bearing masonry. So we have very complex modeling requirements each of the structure, for example, the earthen house or adobe structures, if for example we have, will have very complex modeling requirements. But we are trying to develop a solution just for first simple buildings, and then we can extend it to the complex structures also. But we cannot ignore them, as I have said. Uh, we may not just focus on other structural systems. This is the first candidate which requires our attention if we want to develop some simplified modeling solution. So one promising solution which I can think of, which can you can say which can be used as a replacement of conventional masonry system, is what we call as the interlocking compressed earth block masonry or earth bricks masonry. Uh, Conventional masonry system, as we know, that it provides low level of ductility, it fails in a brittle manner, and it has a very weak out of plane strength if it is not properly anchored. There is another kind of block which have recently developed all around the globe and currently being used. In Pakistan also some of the organizations have started making it, is the interlocking compressed earth block. The first thing is that it is compressed, it is not burnt brick. Second is that it has shear keys so that it interlocks with the other element or brick or block element, and therefore it doesn't require any significant mortar or any, you can say, other uh, adhesive in different bed joints. So, and one more thing is that we can also add reinforcement to this kind of structural system, and I will introduce it in next 2-3 slides, and not in one direction but in both directions. In vertical and horizontal directions also, this system have the facility to introduce reinforced bars, and then once we have lateral bars also, we can connect the, or we can anchor different walls in perpendicular direction and develop a integrated or unified coupled wall action, or in fact a very improved version of the confined masonry. So in different parts of the world, this solution is being adopted, and they have modified the shape, size, and other features of that interlocking compressed earth blocks or bricks according to their local environment and their local construction practice. But there are some common features. For example, all of these bricks which are being shown here, they have holes in them from which the rebars, the vertical rebars, can pass. Some of them also have horizontal holes or horizontal grooves at the base which you can use to pass lateral bars. Some have one hole or some have two holes. Their sizes are also different. What we are currently doing here at NUST is that we are trying to optimize its shape according to our local scenario, and then we can also trying to optimize its composition, and finally we'll come up with a solution which we can give to industry. And the main benefit of all doing all that is that we will have the complete research and development at the back of that product. Currently what our local organizations are doing, that they are just adopting some of the shape or composition from any international you can say practice, and then they just start replicating it in Pakistan, but they don't have any R&D behind that, whether that shape or size or composition is optimized or not. And that R&D is required not only at the material level but also at the full structural level. So what we are doing is that we are developing our own technology in that. Not only we are optimizing the shape and the you can say composition, but also we are trying that masonry as a whole system, as a whole structural system, because we want to just introduce that solution in the industry uh, with its all of its research and development, and we want to introduce it as a full structural system. So we are trying to develop the mechanical properties, basically first estimate the mechanical properties at material level and then full structural level, and then we want to try some simplified modeling approach also for the analysis of such kind of buildings which we are going to propose. So the full research and development is in progress, not only at material level but at the individual wall level and at the full scale structural level also with the static and dynamic analysis of these kind of structures. So soon we will be able to kind of introduce this comprehensive solution to industry. Then another issue which I will quickly discuss, although it is not related to buildings, but it is related to the essential infrastructural facilities. For example, dams, for example, the power plants, for example. So this example is from Gudu power plant, where we have actually carried out the structural health assessment of a damaged foundation of a steam turbine. We actually performed the vibration based structural assessment. Apart from all the non-destructive testing, I actually would like to focus more on the vibration based health assessment. We actually have shaken that whole structure using an eccentric mass vibrator, calculated its natural mode shapes and time periods, and use them to construct a computer model which can be used for the design of retrofit of that building. So this is just one view of the mode shapes which we were able to identify as part of the free and forced vibration response of that damaged structure. So similarly, the second example in this area of essential facilities is from this Gulpur hydropower project. I want to especially emphasize the importance of the site-specific probabilistic seismic hazard assessment. In developing countries, the all the important structures, for example, the high-rise buildings, and obviously the dam is very important, but still the site-specific hazard assessment is performed for high-rise buildings also, and it is also sometimes required as part of the performance-based seismic design. Currently, we are, I don't know, for some reason reluctant to actually perform site-specific hazard assessment and still relying on the code prescriptions or values for seismic hazard, even for very important structures. In this example, we have actually carried out the hazard assessment for the site of this Gulpur hydropower project, and we developed actually the seismic hazard maps for that particular project site. We considered all those faults uh, which are lying in the vicinity of that project site. Actually, we have taken 200-kilometer buffer from the project site and therefore considered the contribution of each of the fault at that location. Similarly, we have performed site-specific hazard assessment for the some of the sites for buildings constructed as part of the Nea Pakistan project. So this trend should be encouraged to perform site-specific hazard assessment. In the new building code also, we are specially emphasizing on this idea that although the PSHA for whole of the country is being performed and the results are being presented, but they are for general use only. For special buildings, the designers are encouraged to actually carry out site-specific hazard assessment. Another issue which I want to highlight here is the poorly executed structure, their analysis and their modeling. Uh, Unfortunately, we may have several of such kind of structures which were not executed properly, which do not, they may have some quality control issues. This example is example from a bridge, which we have actually conducted its testing and then analysis also. It was located in Sialkot, and it was a bridge with very high strategic importance because it was located very close to the border. It was the only link between rest of the country and some of the villages which were located within the administrative boundary of Pakistan at that location. So we may have structures which have workmanship issues. We may have structures with alignment issues or finishing issues. There may be issues of several types. For example, exposed rebars. For example, the post tension rebars are exposed and there may have significant losses in the post tensioning. So we carried out that evaluation and we have actually conducted the load test also for this particular example bridge, and we were able to identify some of the issues uh, not only from the experimental evaluation but also from the modeling also. These are some of the views of those load tests which we are which we have actually conducted for that bridge. Uh, After the analysis, we were able to identify that the existing factor of safety for that bridge under ultimate loads was just greater than 1. So the existing capacity was just exceeding the demand which is expected under high levels of live load or traffic load. So we proposed several measures to rehabilitate or actually uh, uh, we actually carried out the influence line analysis and therefore identified some of the solution methods which we provided for that particular bridge. Uh, one last issue in this research and academics discussion which I want to highlight is that all of our efforts will be of little use if we fail to actually translate or convert our research findings into actions. So in order to actually understand why some people take precautionary measures and others do not, while having the same level of seismic risk or exposed to the same level of hazard, we actually carried out an empirical study from Ravla, and we try to actually quantify the level of risk perception, how people think that what is the level of risk according to them, uh, which they are subjected to. And our basic hypothesis was that the level of preparedness for a particular household will be related to the level of seismic risk which it is perceiving. And as a result of this study, we found out that this hypothesis was correct. People who think they are more at risk, they are willing to take, they are easily willing to take some preparedness measure compared to the ones which don't think that they are at risk. So we actually try to quantify 4 dimensions of risk perception, actually seismic risk perception: fear, trust, awareness, and attitude. Fear of earthquakes, trust on the local development authorities, awareness about the actual earthquake phenomena, and their attitude towards that phenomenon, whether they are willing to take some action or not. Surprisingly, 91% of the respondents in that area, Ravla quote, believe that they will experience an earthquake in their remaining lifetime. But only 16.5% actually took some precautionary measures. So we finally uh, understood that there is a very strong relationship, a significantly positive relationship between the risk perception and the preparedness. Currently, the preparedness level was not uh, that high, but the people who perceived risk more were willing to take an action more easily compared to the ones which were not perceiving risk. A vast majority of the respondents were unaware of the actual earthquake phenomena. More than 27% of the respondents actually think that they are not living in an seismic prone region. So the results were kind of surprising. In fact, a big majority also uh, was uh, was unable to actually indicate or explain actually what earthquakes actually are, what caused them. The real cause, uh, most of them were not relating them to the physical phenomena or physical, you can say, reasons. So the understanding the social aspects of earthquake risk is also important. We will not be able to translate our research findings into actions if we fail to understand the social implications of this earthquake risk. So this is also something which requires attention in our local Pakistani context. Now let me quickly discuss something about the development of building codes and standards and their enforcement. Currently, you might have already heard that the Pakistan Engineering Council is in the process of formulating the updated Building Code of Pakistan. And it will not be only seismic provisions, it will be a comprehensive BCP 2021. Some of the key challenges which we are facing in that are: first is the development of national seismic hazard maps. We know already that the seismic design philosophy have already shifted from the PGA based zones to the spectral acceleration based distributed seismicity. So therefore, we need to develop seismic hazard maps according to these new parameters, these new information which is available, and some of the issues I have discussed already in the first part of my presentation. Then the other major aspect would be the capacity building of structural engineers to use modern tools. Since we will be converting from zone-based UBC 97 method to the spectral acceleration based IBC method, so we need to actually uh, we may need to perform some capacity building training programs or some you can say some events such that the practicing engineers are familiarized and comfortable with the use of this new SS and S1 based method. Similarly, there is an issue of the retrofitting guidelines for non-engineered masonry buildings. I have discussed a lot about that. And finally, the most important issue is the enforcement mechanism. A sound enforcement mechanism is required, whether it can be through provincial or district level regulations or bylaws enforced by, for example, the local development authorities. So all of these key challenges which we are facing currently in the overall scenario, not only in the development of building codes, but also in the overall seismic scenario of this region. So just to have a quick overview of where we actually stand right now in terms of the development of uh, regulations and standards and building codes. We know already that the very first building code of Pakistan was developed, officially developed in 1986, but it was not implemented. It was just used as an advisory document with some seismic provisions. Prior to that, we were mostly using either then version of UBC or the BS codes. We still keep on using the older versions of UBC up to recently when we have 2007 Building Code of Pakistan after the Kashmir 2005 earthquake. But then, as I have said, that recently Pakistan Building Code is being improved now, and we may expect the BCP 2021, which will be actually incorporating several of the uh, IBC methodologies and design provisions. Some of the specific challenges related to the development of the well-researched building code, and basically this slide actually shows some of the targets which we have to actually accomplish in next few years. The very first is the risk targeted seismic hazard maps. Currently, because of the unavailability of fragility data and the unavailability of accurate fault model, we may not be able to actually develop risk targeted seismic hazard maps. But this is something which we should do in near future. Similarly, the design wind speed according to the new ASC 7-16 definition should be 3-second gust wind speed recorded at a particular height, 10 meters. Currently, the Pakistan Meteorological Department have several wind speed recording stations, but they are not uh, actually meant for this specific definition. 10-meter height, 3-second gust, and also the maximum design speed should be based on 15% probability of exceedance in 50 years. So, this corresponds to a mean recurrence interval of 300 years. So we must have a huge data set recorded at a standard definition in order to develop the basic design wind speed maps. This is a real challenge for us. Design ground snow load maps. We have actually conducted some research recently on this topic, and we will be able to develop the basic ground snow load maps, but they need to be updated to state of the art values based on the actual measurements in the next code. Similarly, the design rainfall intensity based on this specific definition, 15-minute duration based on a 100-year storm which we may expect. Similarly, ground snow loads and in fact the ice loads caused by the freezing rain. That also is something which we may need to consider in future. And lastly, the flood zonation maps. The flood loads require actually the ASC 7-16 latest method which we are currently adopting in new code requires a base flood elevation in order to start the flood load calculation process. That base flood elevation is actually coming from different flood zonation maps, and we need to develop such maps for Pakistan which are consistent with ASC 24 definitions. Currently, the Pakistan Meteorological Department and Federal Flood Commission have a huge data set of base flood elevations according to different definitions, and we need to actually convert that into a sound flood zonation map which is consistent with the ASC 7 definition. Another aspect which is capacity building and training, and currently once we will formulate that code, finish that document actually, we will start a comprehensive, you can say, seminar series or workshops for introducing that code to our current structural designers and basically getting themselves familiarized with some of the latest design approaches or provisions as indicated in the latest IBC versions of building code. So this is also one area which we may need to focus more. Uh, some of the efforts which we have recently done in at NUST related to this area is that we have started this website where we actually post our training material or learning content which the practicing engineers may follow, and therefore they may be familiarized with some of the latest tools available in research, but they are not that much welcomed in the construction industry and local practice. So we want to provide all those training materials and all those simplified modeling guidelines, solutions which we have developed in simple manner to our field engineers where they can try, and there we can collectively bridge that gap which currently exists in Pakistan. We also frequently publish different reports and training manuals, which we just submit to different organizations, and sometimes we just put it openly on internet so that people can access and then they can get benefit. So this is just two of the examples which we have recently published, and they are available freely on our web resource. For example, this one. Uh, Recently, we have developed detailed recommendations and guidelines for the improvement of building code of Pakistan, and this is not valid for this effort. This will remain valid for future efforts also. So this is available on our web resource. Similarly, we keep on updating uh, or addressing some of the practical issues which are faced by the construction industry and some of the practicing design engineers, and then we can work together as to find some solution. The last point which I want to highlight here is the public education and awareness. As I have said earlier, that all of our efforts will be of little use. In some cases, they may be of no use at all if we fail to convert them or transfer them at the grassroots level. And one of the most effective uh, tool is the local media for public education and awareness. So all of those who are related to this area of seismic resilience and safety and vulnerability, they should keep on using that medium in order to sensitize people that the buildings which they may be living in, they may become, they may not perform well in future earthquake. They may have significant deficiencies which may need to address. And for the structural designers, they may need to focus more on latest tools, the use of latest tools. They may need to improve their understanding of structural behavior and rely less on just software outputs to actually come up with safer designs. So all of these efforts are actually to finally come up with a comprehensive and you can say integrated action plan against the seismic risk or in the favor of seismic resilience of Pakistan. So what I sometimes do is that actually one of my student is also working on developing simplified infographics to make people understand, or maybe we can include them in the curriculum also for our kids, uh, to make them understand the science of earthquakes, why they are occurred, what they should actually do when they feel a shaking or experience an earthquake. What is the first action they should perform? And all of those information is now converted into easy to understand local language so that people can, uh, the layman or our next generation can be trained in such a way that they actually understand its science and they actually understand what they should do once they experience an earthquake. So finally, I just will close my talk on this point that all of these efforts may not be considered in their, you can say, in their own or in their single aspect. Actually, all of the efforts should be integrated. Obviously, the role of well-researched building code is far more than, for example, the role of individual designer or individual organization. But still, the academia, in terms of research and development, the role of civil society, the role of practicing engineers, for example, and similarly the role of government organizations and disaster preparedness authorities may not be undermined, and therefore they all need to have an integrated effort if we want to achieve earthquake resilience in Pakistan. So with this message, I will end my talk here, and if we have any questions, we can discuss now. Yes, I'm not sure I have understood it correctly, but he's asking whether if someone want to perform some research work voluntarily, what is the procedure for that? The procedure would be the same for performing any work voluntarily. I think, in my opinion, the best uh, approach would be, and I myself use it also, uh, that instead of waiting for a particular platform, you just produce something and put it on social media and put it on internet digital media free for everyone so that people can see actually, and then they may take some action, or they may, whatever purpose you want to fulfill for from that particular research, that will be fulfilled if you just directly use that digital media direction. uh, Otherwise, I understand that we have the proper academic environment and everything, where we have masters and PhD students which do it as part of their degree requirement. But if someone want to do it voluntarily, he may contact such people, or he may just uh, produce something and upload on social media so that everyone can see and check the implications of such of the work. But I would suggest, please do not do it kind of in your own isolation. Please do consult people who are having same interest as your interest. Yeah, one thing which I want to just mention as the reply to the previous question is, this issue I often face myself also. Uh, the cutting edge research internationally which is publishable have reached to a very specific and narrow domain, and if you keep on, if you want to try to find some idea which is according to you is publishable, then there may be a possibility that that idea may not have any practical application in your local scenario. So this issue is faced by all researchers, although they, whether they accept it or not, but the research which is required in local scenario is most of the time is not, is uh, not able to get published in international journals, because uh, internationally the research is already beyond what is required in the developing countries nowadays. So they are kind of done with that issue already, and you still have that issue in your country. So we have to somehow come up with a balance or kind of a compromise between the latest technological advancements which are being tested and researched in the world, and what is required in your local scenario. I focus more on the second aspect, which is what is required. I mean, uh, the first purpose of research should be to improve the practice in that local scenario where that research is being performed. So this is something which we should all, which actually something to be considered by whole of the academia and research community. Secondly, the question asked currently is that although we have all these universities, still we are lacking that data. Actually, the issue is that universities are not the ones uh, which actually make that data. For example, a phenomena which is occurring or which is actually spanning over hundreds and thousands of years. Our 50, 60 years of narrow slice is not going to actually give us the overall true picture. Currently, we have from the international databases the ground motion records or ground motion data from last several years. If we talk about the magnitude and locations, we may safely say that we have 100 years of data available from international databases. But if we talk about the time histories of several of the major earthquakes in the world, we may have maybe 30 or 40 years of data, which is not enough to actually quantify something which is spanning over thousands of years, like a phenomena like earthquake. So therefore, we have that probabilistic or statistical science, which just give us an approximation of the future possibility or the level of ground shaking. So, as I have indicated in the talk also, that an integrated seismic monitoring network with hundreds and thousands of seismic monitoring stations spanning over whole Pakistan is what is required. This is and one idea which I want to just float here, uh, and actually it is tested in Philippines, and I taken that idea from there. I'm not sure I'll be able to uh, we actually implement or make it part of the new building code or not. But this is something we should all consider, and the idea is that in Philippines, as part of the necessary requirements by the local development authorities, whenever there is a building which is more than 10 story, the authorities require you to install a seismic monitoring equipment permanently in that building. Whenever the building is more than 25 story, you are required to put that equipment or that sensor at 3 locations in your building. This is part of their law. This is part of their building code. So, and we know that Philippines is a high seismic risk area. So, uh, as part of that very good legislation, because you know the cost of that sensor is far less than even 1% of the cost of building. I mean, it is less than 0.1% of the cost of the building. In case of Pakistan, I can say maybe 500,000, 600,000 maximum, that sensor. So what happened in last few years is that as part of this necessary legislation in Philippines, now they have hundreds and thousands of seismic monitoring sensors located across whole Manila, which is the capital of Philippines. So these kind of efforts or some kind of strategies we need here also in order to develop an integrated network for seismic monitoring in Pakistan. If we keep on relying on the Pakistan Meteorological Department or some other government organization, maybe uh, we may need to wait for several years. So this is just one example of how the developing countries are dealing with the issues related to the availability of seismic data. I am not in, I mean, I kind of don't subscribe to this idea that in high seismic risk areas, we may not allow the construction of high rise buildings. All over the world, we know that there are several high seismic risk regions where we have many high rise buildings. The area which should be focused actually is their proper design and their performance evaluation. A 22-story building, as you have mentioned, it actually deserves to have a performance based evaluation. Unfortunately, there is no, you can say, a unified or central body which not only regulates, which actually considers uh, or you can say regulate the performance based seismic design currently in Pakistan. This is something which PEC also should be considering, and I will obviously give this recommendation to them that please accept the performance-based design engineer as a kind of a, please acknowledge it first and then accept it as a legitimate design philosophy which results in improved seismic safety, especially in the context of high-rise buildings. So in most of the developing countries, any building more than like 20-25 story actually should actually is evaluated for performance based seismic design. So secondly, in your specific question about which body regulates, currently, as I've said, unfortunately, there is no separate body which actually checks the seismic safety. The local development authority in this case will be CDA, and that will be completely responsible for allowing or checking the seismic safety in this specific case. So this is something uh, which is of open debate, because some of the people I understand may not be in favor of uh, developing a separate body or a separate domain of performance based design for tall buildings in the current enforcing mechanism. But okay, I may still be agreeing if we don't go for that option, but at least the enforcement mechanism can be uh, made more pertaining to the seismic safety issues, and the overall, you can say, current mechanism do not handle that. So the summary is that overall I don't agree with the idea that the solution would be to just don't allow the construction of high-rise buildings. A 2022 story building will be high rise in our local scenario, but it may not be high rise for any other environment, for example. Actually, okay, before answering this question, one quick comment. Uh, One common misconception is that seismic hazard is increasing with time. This is very wrong. And I unfortunately see many learned people also having this idea that seismic hazard is increasing. Actually, what is increasing is seismic risk, because our vulnerability is increasing. So the seismic risk overall is increasing. The phenomena itself is not increasing. There are no more earthquakes now compared to previous some years, 100 years or 50 years. The number of earthquakes for a particular magnitude are almost constant if you take a particular slice of time. Uh, a phenomena which spans over hundreds and thousands of years, uh, it should not speed up in our narrow slice of time. So it is constant for from thousands of years. What is increasing is our own vulnerability because of the poor quality of construction which we are having, and we keep on having it, and therefore the overall seismic risk is increased. Uh, Now we are able to record more earthquakes compared to past several years, and this also is a reason for this misconception. We are recording more compared to past, but the total number of earthquakes at a particular time remains constant on average. Uh, the question was about the brick masonry system which I propose and which I will keep on advocating for next several years. The compressed earth blocks. The first idea is that they are unburnt, so they have significantly less carbon footprint. But the second thing which you actually asked is how they are actually made. Uh, they are pressed earth blocks. They have maybe 8 or 10% cement in them, some percentage which we can optimize later also. But the idea is that you have a special press for that that can be operated manually as well as through electricity, and that press actually uh, have a built-in mold, and you can just use the material which you want, and then it is pressed to have a very fine looking high finishing product in the form of ICEB. So currently we have that press at NUST. We want to make, first we try to make our own press, but then later we purchased it. And I will actually, it can have several samples. I mean, in just few hours uh, you can actually develop more than 100 brick samples. But still, I believe that if we have to have a commercial level potential for this product, we have to design a press which have far more speed and efficiency compared to what we have currently. This is something which may be improved later. But the basic idea is that at least we are able to develop enough samples that we can perform any structural level testing or any full three-dimensional prototype tested on shake tables. So the issue of the irregular molds and everything, that is not there in this, because we have a very standardized press for making that. The first thing is that this zone thing is a story of the past now. We have already shifted from zone-based approach to the distributed spectral acceleration-based approach, where we have two new hazard parameters, SS and S1, short period spectral acceleration and long period, unanimously decided by several researchers and international codes and standards as a better seismic hazard parameter compared to PGA. So the zone thing is gone now. So we should talk about SS and S1 values now. Secondly is that if, for example, uh, if a particular older version of building code uh, declares a particular region as 2B and the next version says maybe 3 or 4, it doesn't mean that the hazard actually have increased. I have said that, already said that the hazard itself is constant. What have increased is our capability to assess it, to forecast it. So forecasting would be a better word for example, perhaps, because hazard assessment is just like forecasting the weather. The more data you have, the more accurate forecast you may have, but you may still be very wrong also. So if, for example, a particular building code changes the region, the zone of a particular region, it will simply mean that according to the latest assessment philosophies and the new data which is available now, gives us a very clear picture or a better picture of the hazard of that area compared to the previous assessment or previous building code. So it doesn't mean that the hazard have increased, it is our understanding which have increased. I wanted to include that thing in my talk also, the curriculum issue. But then there were so many points in that I just dropped that idea. That is a whole talk in itself, that what is required in the curriculum and what is the need of the hour. I myself currently offer the performance-based design course at NUST here at master's level, and I feel that the you can say the attendees or students, they are not ready now, or you can say they are not equipped enough to actually directly understand the PBD methodology. So what we need to first enforce or first focus on is the conventional seismic design approaches, and then later we can implement this or teach this at the maybe postgraduate level. So currently it is still considered as a very highly specialized course, although I regularly offer it, but it is considered as a specialized course and not something which can be taught directly to a fresher. So the curriculum issue is a long discussion. I can talk more about it, but the underlying idea is that we need to focus. Um, there are several issues in that. The structural engineering education itself need a significant reformation in Pakistan, and all I can currently do is to just try to mimic something from international best practice into some of my writings and some of my training materials which are available online. Because in order to change the whole in order to change, for example, the whole academic practice and whole educational environment here, you need a lot of time. So what we can do it right now, right at this stage, is to develop quality content, make it freely available to people, and then slowly and steadily we may reach to that level where the academic environment is at least at par to the international practice. I may not be able to give you exactly some date, but it should be a matter of few months from now. Although the formulation of the draft code is in the final stages, but there may be some administrative or some other levels which it have to cover first in order to get it enforced through the governmental order. So it may take few months from now. Yes, these maps are they will be included in the updated building code. They are already developed, and actually what we will do once we formulate or finalize the draft code is that we will start a series of workshops and awareness seminars to introduce these SS and S1 values, because these will be the most important development as far as the new building code would be concerned. The new SS and S1 values and their implications on the current design practice in Pakistan. So I think although the official enforcement may take time, because of the administrative levels which it have to pass. But the maps will soon be available. Maybe the draft will soon be available for public comment, etc. Currently, I actually don't know the answer of this question unless we get the results from the samples with and without mortar. My expectation is that there may not be required uh, any mortar between the interlocking bricks once you have the vertical and horizontal reinforcement also in place. We are testing different configurations currently. For example, uh, one will be with filling all the holes with mortar. Second will be with vertical reinforcement without mortar. Then vertical reinforcement with mortar. And then finally vertical and horizontal both reinforcements with mortar. But one thing is that uh, the mortar is not required as a bed joint in this structural system. This is the advantage of this system, that you may not even require the plastering, or you may not even require the final finish, because the final finish for this pressed brick is already quite smooth, and you may not require these things with the this new system. So actually, I cannot answer this question currently unless I get the test results. But my expectation is that uh, the mortar will not have any role in this system. The bed joint mortar will not have any role in this system. First of all, it is the very first step, and it is a long-term project. I mean, it is not something which can be accomplished in 1 or 2 years. So, as a very first alternative to the conventional burnt brick masonry system, we have proposed this, but obviously it have to be modified according to the local needs and requirements. So, as you have rightly mentioned that in some areas, hilly areas, it may not be a feasible solution, and frankly speaking, I myself is a person which is very impressed with or a kind of an strong advocate of the conventional local structural systems which are already available in the northern Pakistan. For example, this cribbage system or the Diwari system. They may have significant, they may dissipate significant seismic energy uh, as a result of very large inelastic deformations, which not only the conventional brick may not be able to sustain, but also our improved system will not be able to sustain. So, as part of the very first step, we have developed this integrated system where we are not only introducing one wall with this interlocking mechanism, we are also performing its detailed design for an integrated three-dimensional structure also. So we will have bands of horizontal reinforcement which will be passing through special bricks having grooves at the base also so that the horizontal reinforcement may pass from that. So those bands will be at sill level also the uh, at the level above all the openings, and therefore the whole system will be acting as an integrated three-dimensional structure. But as you have rightly mentioned, it has its own limitations, and obviously it need to be modified. But I think we should, instead of focusing on improving the burnt brick, I think we should just get rid of it now because the world have moved from the burnt brick already. So I think we are the only one of the few countries left which are still using and uh, basically making these burnt bricks in abundance. So although it offers some advantages of cheap construction and maybe some better insulation in some cases, but it has far more disadvantages. Yeah, this is a very important question. This is this actually covers one, uh, you can say, detailed or very complex aspect of the implications of the new code actually. Uh, this time the building code committee is comprised or it has a dedicated team to develop the enforcement mechanism also, unlike the last code. So this time not only the experts will develop a draft or actually formulate or compile the international best practices and modify them in the local environment. This time also it will be accompanied by a very strong enforcement mechanism. So a separate group is dedicated to actually work out this issue which you have mentioned. So you will soon see the details of that soon, and they have actually developed already the enforcement mechanism which will be available in near future. So this issue is specially addressed this time. So it's not left open uh, unlike the previous one. The local development authorities will be actually uh, will be the local bylaws and local development authority guidelines, they will be modified in line with the new building code, and therefore we will ensure that, in fact that group will ensure actually that the implications of design provisions according to new code, they are actually transferred at the lower development authority level also. Right. So this is something which is especially being considered by the code committee in recent times, because Um, since we are having a significant change from the old UBC method to the new IBC method, so we may be very careful about its implications also. So the Hazard Assessment Committee and the subcommittee for design load calculations, and there are several subcommittees, they are combinedly working on this aspect. Uh, Currently, I may not be able to answer this question directly whether there will be certain buildings which may require retrofit according to new code and which may declare unsafe. Currently, I may not be able to comment on that because the it depends on the final level of hazard and also some other design implications which will be the result of shifting from UBC to IBC. Because, for example, the concept of seismic design categories in IBC building codes enforce different detailing requirements and the use of different structural systems compared to the zones in UBC 97. So each structure now will be assigned a seismic design category according to the SS and S1 values and according to the risk category which is associated with that structure. And that seismic design category will have certain implications on the use of structural system and some detailing requirements and other design provisions. So currently, this is something which is being considered, but I am not in a position to answer it directly, whether there will be certain buildings which may require retrofit or not. But I think that uh, this issue will be sorted out before the you can say enforcement of the next building code. This may not be just left open because in that case there may be certain cases where the seismic design category of few buildings is such that the detailing already performed or design already performed may not be deemed safe according to the new building code, and there may be some very important buildings which may have this issue. So this issue is being considered nowadays by the committee. No, they are not affecting. Simple as that, because the phenomena itself is huge enough to be affected by some man-made activity. So although there are several theories available, for example, the Earth's rotation may affect the plate tectonics, the population or the construction of heavy structures may affect the plate tectonics, but these are all theories. There is no single piece of evidence in favor of these theories. So the phenomena itself is on average constant. As I have said earlier, that I am currently not in a position to comment on the cost implications directly and the you can say retrofitting issues which may arise as a result of enforcement of this building code. All I can say currently is that uh, the hazard assessment is carried out using state-of-the-art methodologies available, using state-of-the-art seismic source model and earthquake catalog which can be developed, and it is developed recently by a team of experts including the top geologists and seismologists of Pakistan. So we may get a better picture of seismic hazard this time, but I am not in a position to comment on cost implications directly. I mean, obviously there may be implications, but let's uh, let's wait for the finalization of draft, and then we can answer this question in a better way. I think no, it may not cover non-structural elements or sorry, non-building structures. it will mainly focus on building structures.
So let me close now. So thank you very much, Dr. Saab, and such a fine and informative lecture. And I really enjoyed the question answer session. It was such a knowledgeable, good questions were asked and they were adequately answered
Thank you, sir.
by you. And if, gentlemen, I think all the questions were very adequately answered. But since we have a time limit here, now I cannot continue further. If you still have any questions in your mind, the Dr. Saab's screen is still being shared, and his mobile address, his email is given on the screen. You can ask the questions directly to him, or you can mail it to Pakistan Society of Civil Engineers. We will send those emails to Dr. Saab, and you will get the answers. So thank you very much, Dr. Saab, again, and all the participants, and particularly the participants on Facebook. We had, I think, about 11 or 12 participants there too. So, Dr. Saab, I would also request you to become the member of Pakistan Society of Civil Engineers, and please contribute your share. It is not a society belonging to one person or a group of persons. It is for, I mean, it has a board of directors which keep on changing, and it's not a property of one person, my property or any other founder member's property. So it is sort of a trust. So please come forward, join it, and we start running the society as like a society which should be run and on the lines of American Society of Civil Engineers. So this is my request again, and thank you very much. God bless you all, and I will see you on 7th August. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.